Good morning, and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. It is the 23rd of February, and I am tired. You just had something happen at work, and you're just like, I have zero interest in going to work ever again. Like, not that you did something wrong, or you're afraid you're going to get in trouble or something, but it's just like, you're just watching stuff unfold, and you're just like, fuck this, why am I still dealing with this bullshit? That's where I am today, as I drive to work. Thrilling life we have here. So what have we got? I was thinking about this yesterday while I was getting ready. I'm going to talk about this a little bit because last night's episode of The Bad Batch, or yesterday's episode of The Bad Batch, was not particularly substantial in terms of, like, emotional arcs or anything like that. It felt kind of like a filler episode. That guy behind me definitely shouldn't have gone. It felt kind of like a filler episode. But, you know, it wasn't. It was a, it was a regular episode. But one of the things I was thinking about was that, last night's episode of, you know, the whole thing with people talking about, about the issues with Phase 4 of Marvel Studios, and where that kind of, you know, for some people didn't quite land and all of that, we talk about, you know, why it didn't work, and what exactly it was that went wrong in all of that. And I think that the underrated thing in the whole situation is that Phase 4 of the MCU started development. It had to have started development before the acquisition of Fox. Because if it didn't start development before the acquisition of Fox, I don't know how that would have worked. It was supposed to come out starting in 2020. So we talk a lot about Marvel having these grand plans and having these big kind of, you know, overarching ideas and stuff like that, and the idea that, oh, we're going to, you know, we know what we're doing. We have a plan for this. We know what we're doing. All that kind of stuff. That's how we kind of think about Marvel as it is right now. Problem is, like, yes, they can have multiple plans in place for what to do in the event of X, Y, or Z, and that is perfectly fine and perfectly acceptable, but I think that it's far more likely that Marvel, like, they have these various plans in place for, here's what we're going to do, you know, if everything is equal, here's what we're going to do if we get back the rights to the X-Men, here's what we're going to do if we get back the rights to Kang the Conqueror, and these are all things that are, you know, like, when these plans started taking shape, they're not things that are, oh, we're going to acquire Fox and get all of it at once. There's a lot of, oh, well, maybe we can make a deal with Fox to be able to use the Fantastic Four, be able to use Kang the Conqueror. Like, we can point to our success with Spider-Man and be like, hey, do you want to do something similar with the Fantastic Four? And maybe they'd go for it. Like, it's all that kind of stuff where it's like, all right, I can see how that would be appealing to Fox, because they hadn't had much success with the Fantastic Four IP and all of that. So, this idea, then, that we have to, they have these grand machinations in place for what to do, isn't inaccurate. It's not wrong to say they have these plans, but what they don't have is the ability to speed up the legal timetable around which these plans actually will take effect. That's what they don't have, and that's a big part of it. They don't have the ability to point to, okay, we're doing X, Y, and Z now, and a lot of these plans appear to have been predicated on rights changing hands. So, like, if I'm, you know, if I'm Disney and I'm going to negotiate a deal for the Fantastic Four, that's a one-off thing. And then same thing goes for X-Men, and same thing goes for, if the Spider-Man rights were to revert, which I don't think is likely, but all that kind of stuff, where it's like, okay, so we have all of these things that could possibly happen, so let's just keep it all kind of under wraps and keep it all kind of understood, and we'll move from there. So the problem is that, like, when we look at what happened and why it took so long for this to happen and why this feels so late comparatively, when it's like, this feels like an opener to, like, this is how they should have started out Phase 4, or this should have come out, like, where Eternals did, or where Shang-Chi did. Well, probably Eternals, because I think you need Shang-Chi for the tease about his what the origin of the Ten Rings. And I think all of that is kind of like, the problem is that they have to balance, we need to continue making movies, and we want to build toward this, but we can't touch this until X happens. So if you look, we start to get the indication of things that are here, and they're allowed to use with smaller roles. Like a very small role for, what's his name? For Mr. Fantastic and for Professor X in, what's it called? In Multiverse of Madness. Namor is probably the biggest, but I think Namor wasn't tied up in Fox. If you look at, like, Kang finally gets a major starring role, and that is here. And I've said it multiple times, I'm like, I really wish they didn't announce Jonathan Majors as Kang, because, like, when we get to Loki, which again has a small role for Jonathan Majors, comparatively, I mean, he's in the entire final episode, but comparatively, it's kind of a small role. I mean, he's not in it up until that point, and he's not mentioned up until that point. So it's easy enough to do like a week's of shooting, and you get that. And it's one of those things where it's like, we have to get, everyone kind of on board with this, and we have to wait for the rights to go in. So Loki was able to do that because of where it was in production comparatively to everything else. So what we have here is kind of the same issue. It is kind of the same, like, hey, we are doing, what's it called? We're doing, what's what we're looking for here? We're looking for, MCU Phase 4, and when we have all of this, we really can't start introducing things. Now, I'm of the belief that the Kang the Conqueror introduction via press release after Investor Day entirely comes from, what's it called? It entirely comes from a desire to show investors what their investment is getting. And if we look at, like, why was Kang announced that way? Why are we marketing so much on Kang? It's not a message to the viewer, because the viewer has very little to know about Kang at this point, unless they're diehard comics fans. But outside of that, they don't really have he's not, he doesn't have a huge cultural touchstone. In the same way Thanos didn't, but now he's going to, because he's going to be in these movies. So it's kind of that situation where it's like, why market on Kang? Why be like, oh, Kang the Conqueror is coming? And it's simple. It's because you want to be able to market your investment and show, oh, we're recouping our investment in this. So you want to be able to show them, like, oh, look, we spent all that money for Fox. Here is an example of us starting to make that money back. And I think a lot of it comes down to that, where it's like, oh, here's how we're starting to make that money back. So, just look out for more things like this with, what's it called? With Kang and with other characters. It's an interesting kind of, situation that they're in because of the massive cost of buying Fox and having to prove that the $50-something billion they spent, or $40-something billion they spent, was a good investment. That's a rough thing to do, and then they're in that situation. So it does kind of make sense if you think about it. it's one of those things where it's like, why didn't they start this sooner? It's like, well, because they didn't have the necessary rights that they were hoping to have. And it's that kind of thing where it's like, and now it all kind of like under this banner, I'm like, okay, this all kind of makes sense now. But again, that's a lot of speculation on my part. I don't know how accurate any of that is. So this most recent episode of The Bad Batch picks up where the last episode left off, and I think that is, it's interesting because it's like now we have the what's it called? We have Omega figures out how to track the ship, so they can get the ship back by tracking her gonk droid, and she goes off and starts tracking the ship. There are a lot of police officers on the highway today. So she's tracking the gonk. So she's tracking the gonk droid, and that's how they find the ship and are able to track it back to where they belong. And I think the whole episode is kind of one of the weaker ones because, again, I said this last week, I think the strongest episodes of not just The Bad Batch, but the other animated entries as well, the strongest episodes are all designed to, designed to show the viewer emotional arcs and stuff like that. I don't think this episode had a particularly strong emotional arc for any of the characters, nor does it have a particularly interesting world-building aspect, where it's like, oh, we've encountered this guy, he has a group of thieves, he has stolen our ship, we need to get our ship back. Okay, so it's like, it's very one-to-one, and it's like, alright, well, I guess, like, it's very linear, and I guess it's like last week they got the emotional catharsis out from acknowledging the departure of Echo, so now they're like, alright, well, what do we do here? But at the same time, it does kind of feel a little bit weaker, in so much as it's not exactly well executed in that regard. Like, one of the things that always continues to startle me about the show, just how good the animation is, and I think that's kind of like what keeps me going through it. And I think last week, or yesterday, on Exploring Hyperspace Lanes, Josie and I discussed the impact of the Bad Batch, where it's like, it's not like the Clone Wars, where when we watch the Clone Wars, we have all of this cool stuff we can, that's worth rewatching, like the Mortis arc. There's the last 4 episodes, the intro of Clone Force 99. Like, these are like all segments of the episode that I would rewatch and watch multiple times. And at the same time, it's like, I don't think the Bad Batch quite has that. I don't think the Bad Batch quite has the episodes that are going to make you want to go back and watch it for a second time or watch it for a third time or anything like that. It's you're here to get the story. Once you get the story, you're good. And I think that's kind of to the detriment of the show. The fact that I'm not super psyched about what else can I get out of this, in the same way I was like with Andor. Like, I don't know what that says about the show, really. Like, Andor, it's like, I was like, there are episodes of Andor that I would watch again and again. Like, the finale's fantastic. Like, the episode with Andor in the prison is probably the single best hour of TV last year. Like, it's all things like that where it's like, it's, why am I less interested in this? And it's like, it's just that it's not doing anything interesting. There's nothing that the show is doing at this point that is interesting enough to rewatch. And I think that, like, and the show does have its moments, don't get me wrong. I do enjoy, when the show does do cool things, I do enjoy the cool things the show does. Like, 2 weeks ago when they had the 2-part episode about going from a clone army to a conscripted army. Like, that whole episode is so fantastic. The first episode of this is fantastic. Of the show is fantastic. The episode we just had last week is fantastic. But there is so much in this show that's just kind of like okay, and not anything special, that it's just kind of dragging the whole thing down. And it's the kind of thing where if it's like, you ever play a video game and you're like, oh, fuck, I want to replay this. And then as you start to load the game up to start the new game, you're like, yeah, but there's this part that I got to sit through, and I don't want to sit through that part. That's kind of where I am with The Bad Batch, where it's like, yeah, it has cool moments, and there are some episodes that are really good, but with 13 or 20-something episode seasons, or 16 episode seasons, it's like, there's a lot there that's like, kind of forgettable. And I feel like this is one of those kind of forgettable episodes, where it's like, alright, well, moving on. Like, what's next? And, next we're going to watch The Flash, which I have a feeling we'll have a lot to talk about tomorrow with The Flash. But we'll see. So I think that's a good place to wrap up for today. This was about The Bad Batch, episode 10, I think it is. The next episode we do will be tomorrow morning about The Flash, season 9, episode 3. And then on top of that, tomorrow evening we'll be doing the movie Emily, which is coming out in theaters this weekend. I think it's finally getting a wide theatrical release this weekend. I think it came out already late last year. I think it had like a film festival circuit, and it got picked up by a distributor, so now it's getting a wide release. So we're talking about Emily. Saturday, we're going to do Cocaine Bear, because I guess, why not? I actually was debating it. Do I do that, or do I do Marcel the Show with shoes on? And I think Cocaine Bear is probably the better answer. Especially considering how low ad revenue has been this month. And what was the other one? After that, we also have new episode of The Last of Us. And we'll wrap up there for today. So until then, have a great rest of your week.